This section can be a little dense in terms of information, so make sure that you are watching the supporting videos that I have posted links to throughout this part. We know that bones and basically all of a child will grow throughout infancy and childhood, and bones not only have to grow in length at the epiphyseal plate, they also have to grow in width, and that is called appositional growth. This shows you, this slide and the next one show you the growth plate, and you'll remember that there are two, one between the proximal epiphysis and the diaphysis, and the distal epiphysis and the diaphysis. And that growth plate is going to be formed of hyaline cartilage, and it is, as we mentioned in the last section, a remnant of the original hyaline cartilage template, which gave rise to the majority of bones in the skeletal system. This shows you the various zones in terms of what cartilage is doing and how it is basically first resting, cartilage cells not doing anything. Then the chondrocytes start to multiply, then they mature, then they start to calcify and get replaced by osteoblasts and therefore bone. And again, it happens both at the distal and proximal growth plates, especially on a long bone, or specifically on a long bone. The rate of bone growth is going to be controlled by growth hormone, which is going to be secreted by the anterior pituitary, and we'll spend some time talking about this in the next class when we tackle the endocrine system. Ossification is going to be over by age 25. That is when the epiphyseal plate is sealed and is replaced by bone, and now is known either as the epiphyseal line or the epiphyseal disc. I learned it as the epiphyseal line. Appositional growth, as we mentioned, is growth in diameter. It is going to occur in that inner layer of the periosteum, which I have mentioned is the osteogenic layer. Osteoblasts are going to lay down matrix on the outer surface of the bone. Osteoclasts will destroy it, if need be, on the endosteal surface. In other words, in association with the endosteum. Now, remodeling happens every single minute of every single day. And basically what remodeling is this. Your bone needs to adapt and respond to the stresses and strains that you put on it due to your activities of daily living. So if you need more bone in one area and less bone in the other, the osteoblasts and osteoclasts of those areas are going to be doing their thing, either building bone up or removing bone matrix, and allowing for bone to be adapting to the stresses and strains that you put on the skeletal system. There was a guy, a German physiologist and surgeon, I believe, whose name was Julius Wolff, who came up with a law he named after himself, Wolff's Law. And the basis of Wolff's Law is this: bone will adapt and grow stronger in places where you need it, and will grow less strong in places where you don't. So it is, in essence, a use it or lose it type of scenario. This shows you what happens when you're talking about bones being broken down, or parts of bones being broken down by osteoclasts, and then rebuilt by osteoblasts, which, once they're surrounded by matrix that they're laying down, become osteocytes. And this shows you the same thing. So say there's a damaged bone, osteoclasts will break it down if need be. Osteoblasts will move in and rebuild it, and then once they are surrounded by matrix, will turn into osteocytes. Remember that those osteocytes can revert back into osteoblasts if required to lay down more matrix. The other reason we need to know about bone remodeling is because we need to maintain the appropriate blood concentrations of calcium. So there are going to be 3 ways that we maintain calcium levels at the appropriate concentration in the plasma. The intestines can absorb both calcium and phosphate due to various hormonal control. When we talk about the skeletal system, we know that osteoclasts are going to break down matrix and release calcium, and we know that osteoblasts will build new matrix, and the calcium will be laid down in bone in that new matrix. So the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts have counteracting activities. The kidneys are also going to play a role, and they will control how much calcium and phosphate we excrete in urine. And this is also under hormonal control. So are the activity of osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So stay tuned because we are going to get there. Calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body, and about 4 pounds, about 2 kilograms, 1 to 2 kilograms, depending on the size of your frame. Most of it is going to be deposited within your skeleton. Like we said, the skeleton is this ginormous mineral storage sink. And we need it for all sorts of physiological functions, which include contraction of muscles, your ability to clot your blood, the action potentials associated with neurons. And if you have concentration variation that is greater than about 30 to 35%, you will start to have problems with your neurons, and you will start to have problems with your muscles. And normal daily fluctuations are about 10%, a little less than 10%. So here is an important fact. We are told from the get-go that dairy is the most important way to get calcium in our bodies. And I'm going to go off on a little tangent here because this is important to know. When the government changed from the food pyramid to the My Plate recommendations, they did not include dairy. And the dairy lobby went crazy. They spent a lot of money and they lobbied, and they had this big kerfuffle because the dairy industry considers himself an important part of the food industry. And the reason that, if you look at the My Plate recommendations, there is a portion of dairy with each meal, it is because of the fact that the dairy industry lobbied to have that happen. You do not need dairy products in order to get calcium. You can get plenty of calcium from leafy green vegetables, which actually have a lot more nutrients and vitamins and minerals in them than the store-bought milk that you get that is homogenized and pasteurized. In addition to that, and we go over this in my nutrition class, so here's a plug for my nutrition class. There is some evidence that there is institutionalized racism in the My Plate recommendations because the majority of people of color do not have the appropriate enzyme or sufficient amounts of appropriate enzyme to break down lactose, which is milk sugar. So many people of color are lactose intolerant, yet the dairy industry made a point of pushing dairy as a requirement in terms of the My Plate recommendations. So think about that. I'll get off my soapbox now. You need to know this, not only for this section, but also for the endocrine system, which we're going to go over in the next class, 132, Bio 132. We're going to regulate blood calcium levels through 2 hormones, which are calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, which is abbreviated PTH. So let's take a look-see and talk about what happens. If you have blood calcium levels that are increasing, the C cells in the thyroid gland will be triggered to release calcitonin. So calcitonin is going to stimulate the deposit of calcium within bones. Calcitonin will also trigger your kidneys to excrete more calcium, which will in turn make blood calcium levels fall. If you have dropping blood calcium levels, parathyroid glands will release PTH, parathyroid hormone, which will in turn trigger osteoclasts to break down bone matrix in order to raise the calcium levels in the plasma of the blood. In addition, the kidneys will be triggered to retain more calcium, and the small intestines will be triggered to absorb more calcium. This shows you something similar, just in a different format. So if you have increased blood calcium level, you will have the increase of secretion of calcitonin, which will trigger osteoblasts and prevent osteoclasts from breaking down bone matrix. If you have decreased blood calcium level, you will increase the secretion of parathyroid hormone, which will trigger the osteoclasts to break down or lyse bone to increase blood calcium levels in plasma.